We are discussing some very, very important changes with respect to the Employee Provident Organization. Remember that your take-home salary is probably going to go down as this new year progresses, and the retirement corpus is going to increase because of a very, very significant landmark ruling from the Supreme Court. In conversation with Preeti Chandrasekhar, India business leader at Mercer, and Puneet Gupta of EY. All right, Preeti and Puneet, now that in the last part of our conversation, both of you clarified that opting out of the EPFO is not an option for most employees. Let's look at things at hand. Now, in this case, Preeti, what are the options? Do you see salary structures changing? As you said, bonus is not part of the contributing sort of part of the salary. So will employers want to sort of give out more variable pay or more bonuses? Because on that, there is no EPF contribution.
I would say, so Surabhi, we need to look at the section of the workforce that we are talking about. We are talking about a set of people whose salaries are, whose pay is less than 15,000. We do have some element of bonuses and commissions, but you see, typically organizations tend to give them more guaranteed amount of money and less variable pay. So that would stay because their control on parts of the business and the business profitability, etc., is very, very less. So it is really not fair to expose them too much onto the variable pay just because I, as an organization, want to restrict the Provident Fund contribution. But what some of the companies are doing is that they are looking at restructuring the salary for sure. And we have heard a few companies, of course, this is very, very new. So, the solutions are emerging as we speak. But what we have also seen organizations do is they're giving like a one-time amount to employees to just to cover the reduced take home, let's say for a year or so, and then it falls back to the normal course. And most organizations, what they're doing is, if it is, so as an example, if somebody's basic was 10,000 and the special allowance was 4,000 rupees, so the PF would now be deducted on a total of 14,000. Now compare that with a person whose basic was 10,000 and let's say special allowance was 6,000. So in this case, while the total is 16,000, the companies would be restricting the PF contribution to 15,000, just as an illustration, so that the effect on such an employee is far lesser. But definitely the dichotomy is that the take home reduces, but to your point, Surabhi, the PF, the contribution towards the retirement kitty does increase. This would make a dent in the short term, definitely for employees. But once companies go through the entire restructuring exercises, you will have more solutions emerging, which would balance out things between the employer and the employee.
Okay, fair enough. Puneet, your take on this, on some of these new structures that perhaps might emerge, and also just a point on the 15,000. So, while employees earning below 15,000 are mandated to be a part of the EPFO, as you explained, those who are earning more also can't opt out if they've been already in the workforce. Now, for these individuals who might be earning, of course, well above 15,000 rupees a year, what does the rule state? What is the mandatory contribution? Does it have to be that 12%? Can it be restricted?
Right. So under PF law, if an employee has basic salary, let's take an example, employee has basic salary more than 15,000, say 20,000 rupees, and is contributing on entire 20,000 rupees, then the employee is still complying with PF law, because the PF law says categorically that employees whose salary or monthly pay exceeds 15,000 rupees per month, then such employee and employer can restrict contributions on 15,000 rupees unless they opt to contribute on a higher salary. So in our example, if basic salary is 20,000 and their allowances worth 5,000 rupees, if such an employee is already contributing on 20,000 rupees, at least we believe that there will be no issue because the employee is already contributing on more than the ceiling limit. And therefore, it is only employees whose current basic is less than 15,000 which will get impacted by this ruling the most.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's an interesting interpretation, Puneet, because if that were to be the case, then this is not going to be such a disruptive move, because the employer or the organization can simply take the stance that in any case the contribution is crossing the mandatory threshold of 15,000. then it shouldn't be a problem, right?
Yeah, so it should not be a problem for companies, for employees with basic more than 15,000, because that stand can be taken. And in the past, there are Supreme Court rulings and circulars issued by PF office to clarify that EPFO or the Provident Fund office will not mandate employers to contribute beyond the ceiling limit. So that really helps employees with basic with basic more than 15,000. But a lot of companies also have large chunks of employees with basic salary below 15,000 rupees per month, like all your housekeeping staff, pantry staff, workmen in category of employees have basic salary below 15,000 rupees. And for such category, there could be a significant impact of this ruling.
Understood, understood. That's an important demarcation. This 15,000 rupee limit is really becoming the Lakshman Rekha of sorts between just how deep the impact of this Supreme Court ruling is going to be. But Puneet, having said that, now that is obviously an interpretation which a lot of people would like to believe in, that it's least disruptive, doesn't really impact my take home, doesn't impact life at all. But having said this, do you still see salary structures changing, maybe variable components going up, maybe bonuses going up? Because these components very clearly are out of the ambit of the ruling.
Yes. So companies can have higher bonuses. The only issue is that, some of these salary structures, changes to salary structures will not just have impact on PF, it will also have impact on a lot of other things. For example, with a lot of these allowances going down, a lot of tax exemption goes away, and therefore with more variable pay, the tax cost can go up. Then it will also have implications on benefit under Gratuity Act or in the Bonus Act. So companies will have to take a holistic view on whether or not they want to restructure, because it is not just PF, there could be other implications that companies need to bear in mind.
Okay, all right. Puneet and Preeti, please stay on. We have understood the basics. And now a larger question really after we take this break. Retirement security. EPFO is obviously one vehicle. It is an important vehicle. It is exempt. So it's most tax efficient. But there is also the NPS. And really, what are the things that a working person, an employee must keep in mind when you are thinking of planning for your retirement? This week, we are discussing some very important changes that are sweeping through the EPFO, the Employee Provident Fund organization, thanks to a recent ruling by the Supreme Court. Preeti, I want an overall sort of view from you on how you view the EPFO in its current avatar. A lot of changes have been made. There is the promise of higher contribution towards equities, which should technically mean better returns. There is also a lot of talk about perhaps smart structuring, give units like mutual funds do, equity units to subscribers along with the cash lump sum. How do you see some of this evolving, and what is your assessment of the EPFO structure at the moment?
I think that's a very good question, Surabhi, and we are hearing a lot. You see, when the EPFO decided to open up equity as an asset class for investment, there was a lot of apprehension in terms of equity being risky. We don't know the returns, they're going to be very volatile, there's a lot of uncertainty, etc. But after having traversed a few years, everybody is realizing the merits of actually having an exposure to equity. Though we do understand that the exposure is limited, so if you look at the exempt provident funds, the limit is 15%, but we have not typically seen companies go beyond 10%. So 6 to 10% is the range in which they have the equity exposure for the new funds. So overall portfolio limits its exposure to about 4% or so, because it's just started a few years back. So that is one point. But the challenge there on the equity side is not so much about the returns. You see, there is a technical aspect which relates to how do you account for that equity revenue. It is much easier for me to recognize the revenue when it comes to bonds. I have the coupons which take care of the revenue portion. So that's one point. The second point, interestingly, is we all thought that equity is really, really highly risky. But look at what has happened recently, in terms of some of the fixed income securities. So clearly, it's no more a thought that equity is the only risky asset class would really hold true, because you have other asset classes which are equally exposed, or maybe more.
Absolutely. Puneet, let me bring you in on this as well, because EPFO, the organization itself, is undergoing changes. What place should the EPFO have when you're thinking retirement security? Because let's not forget, there's also the National Pension Scheme. Unfortunately, not too many employers are right now offering both these avenues as an automatic route through which your salaries can start getting invested for retirement. But what should be the right mix?
Right. So the right mix, I think, will be specific for each individual. But one fundamental difference that one should note between PF and NPS is that while PF is is really like a bank account where each month employer and employee contributes, and whenever employee decides to leave employment, employee basically gets a lump sum withdrawal from PF. There is no pension amount, at least from PF account. While NPS, there are a lot of restrictions. While it does provide a lot of flexibility in terms of how an employee wants to invest, under what category, whether they want higher equity or they want higher debt. So there's a lot of options and flexibility in NPS. But then it restricts withdrawal, because before 60 years of age, employee can practically only withdraw 20% lump sum, and the balance 80% is mandatorily contributed to an annuity plan. So employees will have to find a right mix. If the intention is to have monthly pension post-retirement, then NPS is a very solid retirement savings plan, because the whole intention is to provide monthly pension benefit after retirement under NPS, which is currently lacking in EPF. So EPF is good for having a lump sum withdrawal post-retirement, while NPS is a great tool to have monthly pension, ongoing pension post-retirement.
So very quickly then, Puneet, what do you personally do? What do you advise your friends and family members to do when it comes to contribution to both of these schemes, and what's the ideal mix?
So I would say do continue with PF, because it has been the age-old retirement savings scheme. It has worked really well for our parents, and hopefully will work very well for us also. So do continue 12% of your basic towards PF, and have a private NPS account or through the corporate, because NPS you can have a corporate account or you can have an individual account, and every year contribute some money to NPS, so that by the end of your retirement you have both the lump sum benefit to take care of through the EPS, and you have your monthly pension through the NPS. So have the right mix. All
right, so have a right mix. Preeti, last 30 seconds, last word with you. As the employee and the employer undergo this transition, and I think it's important to ask the questions. As an employee, we need to be aware we can ask the EPFO contribution to be restricted. What is the best way out? What would you advise sort of young working professionals to do?
So, Surabhi, I always say don't put all your eggs in one basket. You both have their merits, both have their advantages and disadvantages. You choose which one, so you make sure that you distribute it across both of them. Of course, from an employee standpoint, there are different tax incentives for both of them. And if we are to go by the recent budget announcement of the NPS for the government employees increasing to 14%, we do hope that at some point in time that convergence also happens for the corporate sector. So if that happens, then obviously both get attractive. So I need to see what my tax liability is, what are my other liabilities.
All right, well, whatever you do, make sure you do save up for the future. It's great to live in the present, but what is the point if you're going to have to struggle through your retirement? So make sure you put some savings aside. That's the bottom line. Thank you very much, Preeti, as well as Puneet, for joining in and throwing light on some of these very important aspects, the changes that are coming over. Hello and welcome to Money, 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 your weekly personal finance date with me, Surabhi Upadhyay. The Supreme Court, via its judgment earlier this month, has brought about certain sweeping changes in the savings that end up forming the EPFO corpus. The court ruled that not just basic salary, but special allowances paid out by an employer should also be considered while calculating the contribution to the Employee Provident Fund. This means lesser take-home salary in the immediate term, but a larger retirement corpus when you leave the workforce. Now, while the order came just towards the end of February, several questions with respect to its implementation still need to be answered. And we hope to do exactly that on this week's show. My guests are Preeti Chandrasekhar, India Business Leader at Mercer, and Puneet Gupta, Partner at EY. Thanks to both of you for joining in, Puneet and Preeti. So, I mean, we're still to come to terms with the manner in which this is going to play out, because EPFO has been the default vehicle for so many working Indians for so many years. So let's get your first thoughts on what the court has ruled. The lady kicks it off. So Preeti, you go first.
If you look at the ruling, Surabhi, and compare it with what was there in the BEAR Act. The BEAR Act for Provident Fund always indicated that all the allowances which are ordinarily paid to employees, uniformly paid to all of them, needs to be included. What got excluded primarily was aspects such as commissions, bonuses, where it is linked to somebody's performance, etc. And what was happening was companies actually were structuring the salaries in such a manner so that they were able to get the PF contribution to a minimum level that was possible. What has now happened is Supreme Court has actually come back and said that what was there in the Act also included special allowances to be taken as a part of PF deduction. So that really is what has happened. If you ask, it was always there. It was just that it was subject to different interpretations. The Supreme Court has made sure that it is now uniformly understood by everyone.
Okay, fair enough. Puneet, opening remarks. I mean, someone can immediately argue saying that it's salary that I am earning, so who should decide how much I get upfront today as opposed to how much should be set aside for my retirement?
Absolutely, Surabhi. But, you know, this is a welfare legislation. The intention of PF law is very different. It's to ensure that employees have social security corpus for their future savings. So the intention is really different. Like Preeti said, yes, the intention always was to include all allowances. In fact, Supreme Court in 1962 in the landmark ruling in Bridge and Roof have also said that all allowances which are ordinarily paid to employees are covered under the definition of basic wages. And this ruling has basically reiterated what it said in 1962. But yeah, have big implications for both employers and employees.
So just to sort of take a couple of steps back, Puneet, if you could enlighten us, what was the genesis of this case? How come all of a sudden the court, and that to the highest court of the land, had to come in and clarify how you calculate EPF contribution? What was the genesis?
Right. So Surabhi, in the industry, generally employers contribute towards PF only on basic salary. And there's been huge litigations ever since the PF Act is implemented on whether these allowances are covered under the definition of basic wages. There have been multiple High Court rulings, a lot of them saying that allowances are covered, some also saying that allowances are not covered. So it has always been a huge litigative issue in India. There were 5 or 6 cases which High Court ruled that allowances are covered. Employers have filed appeals against these High Court rulings in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court clubbed these 5 rulings, and then this decision is an outcome of those 5 appeals. So it has always been a matter of debate in India. It's just that Supreme Court have now held that allowances are covered. But I think I'll draw your attention to one point which somewhere has not been dealt in this ruling, is the provision to para 26A, which allows employees to restrict contributions on 15,000 rupees per month if their salary is more than 15,000 rupees. And somewhere the Supreme Court ruling hasn't really given any view on that limit. So how will that limit be applicable, and whether all employees or only certain categories of employees will get impacted by this ruling is something there still needs to be a lot of clarity on.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to come to some of those points in just a second. But first, let's understand what all needs to be calculated, or how the calculations will now happen. Preeti, so it's very clear that if there is any salary head, such as special allowance, then that has to be a part of the sum on which you calculate the 12% contribution, right? Now, what about a head like, choice pay, residuary choice pay, and dearness allowance for that matter? So all of these will be clubbed, and then should we calculate 12% of this?
Yes, so if I go again, I refer back to the Act and also see that in conjunction with the Supreme Court ruling. It's very clear that the allowances, which are either things like bonuses, commissions, which are related to performance and which are not paid uniformly to everyone, are what get excluded. HRA was always excluded, that continues. But what has got very explicitly stated is the special allowance, which is what is interesting, you see, because many most organizations, I would say, were actually having a category called a special allowance, which was like a balancing item or a catch-all. So that is now getting included. So that really is something which is really clearly spelled out in the new ruling as compared to the ambiguity that was existing earlier, and hence the Supreme Court ruling really helps clarify matters. But to Puneet's point, I would also like to reiterate that all this that we are talking about is for employees whose pay is less than 15,000. So why are we not mentioning 15,000? Again, going back to what some of the experts are saying, well, we are not changing the Act, right? The PF Act remains the same. What we are doing right now is just clarifying matters which seemed ambiguous at that point in time. So 15,000 remains. There's no discussion right now on whether that would change or not. But and also to the point of, you know, there are many organizations saying, what is the effective date? Is it retrospective? Is it prospective?
Sure.
There again, we would need to wait and watch. This is again a very gray area. We would need to wait and watch as to what is going to be the outcome. But one school of thought is, you know, it was always there, right? So it's just that people were not doing it. So why talk of a prospective effect?
So let's take these issues one at a time. And first, let's understand the mandate of the EPFO Act itself. So Puneet, to the point on 15,000, and correct me if I'm wrong, basically, if you're earning more than 15,000 rupees, you can opt out of the EPFO as well, right? It is not a legal provision that binds you to keep contributing to the Employee Provident Organization. Isn't that so?
Right. So the definition of excluded employee under the PF law says that anyone who at the time of joining PF scheme was earning more than 15,000 rupees and is not an existing member of PF, then such employee can opt out. If an employee is joining employment for the first time and has salary more than 15,000 rupees, then such employee is excluded. But
so hang on. That's really important. You're saying so the choice to exit or the option to exit only exists with those who are just joining the workforce. That means if I've been working for the last 10-15 years and therefore I've had obviously, you know, contribution to the EPFO, then a mid-career professional like myself can't opt out. Is that the interpretation?
Absolutely. You cannot unless such an employee leaves employment and is unemployed or employed in a small entity for at least 2 months, then the person can withdraw, and then if he joins again, then he can opt out. But otherwise, if you continue employment and you once become a member, then you always continue to be a member.
Okay, fair enough. Preeti, very quickly, your interpretation of exactly this point, just trying to understand if this exit route is even available to most of the employees in corporate India.
So I would agree with Puneet here, Surabhi, that for all those people who were earning above 15,000, who were members of the EPFO, they cannot just decide to withdraw and one fine day say, enough, I don't want to continue contributing to the EPFO. What can be done, however, is that they can restrict the salary which will be exposed to PF contribution. They need not have it on the full salary. They can restrict it, but they can't move out until they are no more employed. They withdraw the entire PF corpus, subject to taxes, of course, and then they sort of move on and they join a sector where there is no PF. Then they can remain out of the PF ambit. Otherwise, pretty much, once I'm there, as long as I'm employed.
Okay, so now most of us are here, which means we can't simply sort of pack up and leave now that the rules of the game have changed. Now that we all have to deal with EPFO, and it's very, very clear that opting out is not really an option.